This is the last in our series, Skeptics Welcome. If you're someone who is skeptical or doubting, I want to let you know that you're in a safe place. We're not here to beat you up, and I hope that you don't feel that way before you leave. I'd love to meet you, in fact, before you leave. If you're someone that's doubting either the reliability of Scripture or the existence of God. You know, the first service, when you preach two services, there's kind of a difference between the services. And sometimes first service doesn't go very well. This morning it didn't. I just really struggled. And I was thinking, you know, the second service is going to be better. And then I get compared to the size of the building. And you just never know what's going to happen, you know. And by the way, Daryl, my sermon topic next week is the bottom line. So that you just saying. When you get on an airplane, the very first thing that happens when you're about to take off is the flight attendant makes a speech. And for many of you, my sermon this morning may feel like the flight attendant's speech. You've heard it all before. You know, the flight attendant gets up and they go through all the things, the safety features of the plane, and tell you all this stuff. And in my mind, I'm sitting here thinking, you know, if you can't operate a seatbelt, I really don't want you on the plane with me. You know, don't sit beside me if you can't figure the whole seatbelt thing out. And if this mask drops down from the ceiling and I start to feel pressure in my chest, surely I'm going to put it on my face. The useful part of that is that you should put it on your face before attending to a child so that you don't pass out before you can help them. But the only problem is if you have two children, you're going to have to choose one of them to put the mask on first, therefore emotionally scarring the other one for life. I like that you have a seat that's a flotation device, but when you're flying over a cornfield in Kansas, it doesn't have to really help you out a whole lot. But usually when that's going on, I'm not listening very carefully because I've heard all that before, and maybe this sermon this morning is going to be that way for you. The reality is in a crowd like this, most people believe. If you're in America somewhere, most people believe. A recent survey tells us that about 90% of all Americans still believe that there is a God or some supreme being, a creator of some kind, which means if you're in a crowd of 20 people, there's a very good possibility that two of them don't believe, and that makes the information that we're going to share this morning somewhat important. Faith is usually a function of the questions that we ask and the perceptions that we have. And I want to start with this question and this perception. You know, believers look at the stars, the creation, and they ask how. In that moment when you're overwhelmed by nature, you look around you and you marvel at nature. However, our unbelief causes us to look at our life and ask why. You know, sometimes we're overwhelmed by the beauty around us and we can get this sense of a supreme being. However, sometimes the injustices and the hurt and the brokenness of life can cause us to ask God why and even doubt his existence. And the reality is most of us oscillate back and forth between this feeling of intense faith and this feeling of a semblance of doubt. And if there is a God, why is there a God? And the follow-up question to that is, which God do you believe in? Who is this God that you believe in? If you don't believe in God, who is this God you don't believe in? A couple of weeks ago, Kurt Cloninger came on a Wednesday night and he shared with us his skit's God View. And in the skit, he does several caricatures of God that are inaccurate characters of God. However, it's really how some people believe in God. This old sheriff who's just waiting for that next time to just blow you away for your next possible sin. Or maybe the old grandpa God who's sitting back and he created all this stuff and now he just kind of watches silently, not helping in any way. Or maybe it's the God like the angry mechanic who's just angry about everything and waiting for that next opportunity to give you a hard time. You know, who is your God? Is your God an angry God? Is your God a judgmental God? Is your God a vengeful God? Is your God a distant God, a voyeuristic God who just kind of watches from afar and really doesn't get very involved in your life? Because if you believe in these gods, it's very possible that if you don't believe in these gods, that I don't believe in those gods either. The reality is that God has been translated poorly in our society. And as a theologian, which is really what I do, it's my job to translate God accurately. Actually, the word theology is theos is God. And when you end something with O-L-L-G-Y, that is the study of. So theology really is the study of God. And so it's the translating of God. And the truth is, if you're a skeptic, I want to start off this lesson this morning by arming you with some ammunition. I want to let you know, just in the spirit of being honest, I cannot definitively prove the existence of God. I don't think anybody in the room can definitively prove the existence of God. Now, I'll also let you know that I don't think that you can definitively disprove the existence of God, but I will tell you I can't definitively prove the existence of God. But here's what I can do. I can tell you why I believe there's a God. And some of the reasons, and there's no way in a 20-some-odd minute sermon that I can tell you all of them, but some of the reasons why I believe in God. You know, we're told in Hebrews 11:1 that faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. And you can't erase faith from the equation when it comes to believing in what you can't see, the existence of this God. But I do believe that there are some evidences in a God that we cannot see. And those are things that I want to share with you this morning. So what evidence do I share? First is the scientific evidence. And before I get into this, I want to let you know I'm not a scientist. And so if you want to come to the starting point after this is over and argue science with me, you're just going to get a dumbfounded look, because that's really not who I am. But there are some things in science that seem pretty simple, and there are things that we can kind of hang on to when it comes to having evidence of things unseen. You know, evidence that supports the existence of God can be found in the concept of specified complexity. And what that means is that the more complex something is, the more it demands that there be a designer who built this complex thing. For instance, if you see someone wearing a beautiful watch, that beautiful watch didn't exist raw in nature. Someone found something and they put pieces together and they created this watch. You see a beautiful painting. If you see that painting, you realize that somewhere, somehow, someone painted that painting. Now, I build guitars. If you see one of my guitars, you'll think, you know, someone built that guitar. It didn't exist on its own. There's complexity there. Therefore, this design demands a designer. Donald Trump's hair. Somebody did that on purpose. And there was a design for that. There was a survey done in 1916, and the same survey was done in 1996, and it only surveyed scientists. And it asked the scientists if they believed in an interactive God, a personal God, one that you would pray to, and that they would, that this God would respond, and that he is a designer. And it's interesting that in 1916, the percentage of people who believed in a personal God, and in 1996, the percentage of scientists that believed in a personal God, that percentage did not change. You know, because science has a way of bringing us into the reality of knowing that where there is the design, there is also a designer. Now, I want to share a quote with you here, and it's from a guy by the name of Francis Collins. And Francis Collins at one time was the director of the National Institute of Health. And he was the lead scientist on something called the Human Genome Project. And what that project did was the Human Genome Project was the group of scientists that discovered DNA, you know, the mapping for life as we know it and humanity as we know it. And so Francis Collins, when he was talking about discovering DNA, he wrote this. He says, "For me, the experience of sequencing the human genome and uncovering the most remarkable of all texts was both a stunning scientific achievement and an occasion for worship." And what he's saying is, in discovering one of the most intricate designs known to mankind, the design of how men are made, it led me to believe that there had to be a maker. It was humbling, and it was an opportunity for worship. See, where there's design, there has to be a designer. It's the law of cause and effect. Another thing that's a kind of a scientific study is nature itself. You see, in nature, we see order, and in order, we see a need for a designer, someone to create order within the things that are going on around us. For instance, the earth that we live on is the perfect size to sustain human life. As a matter of fact, if the earth that we lived on were larger, the atmosphere would be bigger, and it would draw the oxygen and nitrogen away from the earth's surface, and we could not survive. If the earth that we lived on were smaller, it would compress that atmosphere to the point that we could not stand it. The earth that we live on has the perfect mix of nitrogen and oxygen in order to sustain life, and it has to do with its size, and it also has to do with its distance from the sun. If the earth that we lived on were further from the sun, we would freeze. If it were closer to the sun, we would burn. And if you look at the solar system, you realize that there's a design and there's order. And where there's a design and there's an order, there has to be a designer. Nature itself teaches us this. Romans 1:19-21 says, that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish hearts were darkened. You know, a couple of times in the Psalms, we're told, a fool has said in his heart, there is no God. And what he's referring to here in Romans is he's saying, you know, the evidence has been all around us, even though you didn't understand that he was God and you didn't understand the whole intricacies of who God is. By the things that are around us, we can know, and God has made known that he truly does exist. Where there's design, there's a designer, and nature is a willing accomplice to this fact. You know, some things in nature are accidental. We believe that some things just kind of occur and they're just interesting to see, but they're a coincidence. For instance, if you went to Iceland, you might see this elephant rock. And if you can't see the elephant in the rock, you will never find Waldo, I promise you. But this is just a rock occurrence that through years of erosion, this has happened. I always found it interesting. In Iceland is green and Greenland is icy. That's kind of weird. But you know, if you went by Mount Rushmore and saw this, you would not think, wow, how in the world did those four faces accidentally occur on the side of that mountain? You know, there's a design. So therefore, there must be a designer. And the thing I find is interesting, if you look, we're looking from America over into Canada, how dark the skies are over in Canada. And they're much brighter in America from the Canadian side. There's so much bright. And thank you for being a church that I can show that to. There are 150 different chemical compounds and physiological things that must exist in order for life to exist, for life to occur. Over 150, and they don't happen randomly. The idea that they would happen randomly and life would exist has been estimated to be at the odds of 1 in 10 to the 40th power. That's the odds. Now, if you were going to go play Vegas, you wouldn't want to play those odds. As a matter of fact, to put that in some semblance of understanding, to go to high school math and remember what 10 to the 40th power is, that's a 1 with 40 zeros behind it. And 10 to the 40th power, 1 and 10 to the 40th power would be like taking dimes, covering all of Hamilton County with dimes, and stacking them to the moon. Painting one dime blue and blindfolding someone and asking them to wade in the dimes and find the blue dime on the first try. That's 1 in 10 to the 40th power. And that is the likelihood of all of these chemical and physical compounds to happen at just the right time accidentally. So, you know, we all believe in the unseen, right? You've got a garage door opener. You press a button, it opens. Do you know how it happens? No. Do you see what's going on? No. You got a cell phone. You all probably love someone. That's believing in the unseen. You see, in science, the idea that there's order demands that there be someone to place an order. And the idea that there's a design demands that there be a designer. And for me, although I can't definitively prove it, science does lend me to believe that there had to be a creator somewhere. And then the second thing that lends me to believe this, it has to do with philosophy. It's a philosophical evidence. And once again, I'm not a philosopher, so don't come argue Socrates with me back at starting point. Not interested in that, and it'll be a real short discussion. But you know, the reality is the prominence of altruism in our world is another evidence that supports the existence of God. As a matter of fact, altruism would be the greatest argument against survival of the fittest. Think about it. Within most people, there exists this passion to make our world right or to make our world better. We hear of a natural disaster, what's our first response? Our first response is to go and try and help, right? Maybe we should send money. Maybe we should go. Maybe they need food, whatever it is. Our first response is that we want to do something to help those who are broken because of a natural disaster. We see abuse in a family. What's the first response? We want to help. We want to make that situation right. We live in a society where we send missionaries into foreign countries. And why do we do that? Because within our heart of hearts, we want to make things right. We want to do the right thing. We have people in this congregation who their job is to run into a building that's on fire to help people who they don't even know. Why do they do that? Because within them there's this passion to make things right and to do the right thing and to help people. There are teachers in this audience that they work for nothing. They take their whole paycheck and they put it back into their classroom so that they can teach young people to help them make a better life. Why? Because within them there is this prominent feeling of altruism, which means to do something for someone and asking nothing in return, to help others. We all have that within us. And Paul, speaking to the church at Rome, people who believed in philosophy, said this: for the Gentiles who do not have the law do instinctively the things of the law. These, not having the law, are a law to themselves, in that they show the work of the law written in their hearts. What's he saying? These people that don't even understand that there's a God and that there's this moral law, this moral code, they do moral things. And why do they do that? Because there's this law written in their hearts. And so you ask, well, how does that disprove survival of the fittest? Well, Francis Collin, once again, the leader of the National Institute of Health, lead scientist on the Human Genome Project, he also wrote these words, and I thought they were pretty interesting. Selfless altruism, once again, doing something for someone because it's the right thing to do, presents a major challenge to people who don't believe in God. And I wrote evolutionist. It is quite frankly a scandal to reductionist reasoning because it cannot be accounted for by the drive of individual selfish genes to perpetuate themselves. What is survival of the fittest? Survival of the fittest is we rise to the top of the food chain simply because the fittest people will go on to go on to survive, and that within every cell, within every person, there is this need to rise above and to be the fittest so that you will survive. Meaning that you will destroy anyone who competes for your resources. Well, helping people, these are people that are competing for your resources, are they not? Doing good for someone, some child, because they need to learn at your own expense, aren't they competing for your resources? The whole idea of altruism doesn't make sense if we're really people who are surviving to be the fittest. You see, you can't explain altruism by the scientific method. Human beings are the only people who have within them this sense of justice. Now, I believe some dogs do, but no cats do, okay? But human beings have within them this sense of justice, this moral law. Well, that all sounds good. What happens when the rubber meets the road, though? A few weeks ago, I'm in the gym leaning against the machine pretending I'm sweating, and I have this guy walk up to me. I don't even know him. And he told me that Chris, who I do know, told him that I was a pastor, which I'm really more of a pester. And he wanted to know, he told me that his dad was really sick. And he wanted to know if I'd pray with him. And I said, sure. And before we prayed, he went on to say, you know, I don't go to church and I don't know if I even believe in this whole religion thing, believe in this God thing, but I'm thinking, what could it hurt? What am I going to risk by doing it? Because really, that's what belief in God is all about. It's about risk. You see, in Hebrews 11:6, it says, and without faith it's impossible to please him. For he comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. And this was a young man who somewhere, somehow, in some crevice crack of his thoughts, believed enough to think, maybe I could seek him. What would it risk? And that's a good thing. If you want me to explain why the biggest reason that motivates me to be a believer in God, it has to do with another scientific theory. It's called the theory of Schrodinger's cat. You ever watch Big Bang Theory? Sheldon Cooper presented this one time on one of the episodes about whether Penny should date Leonard or not. And she was puzzled, and so he told her that here might be the answer to her question. Like Schrodinger's cat, depending on your perspective, God either exists or he doesn't. And for some people, simultaneously, they can believe both. What Schrodinger's cat doesn't even approach is what happens when you open the box. And that's what leads me to believe. You see, someday the box is going to be opened for us when it comes to whether God exists or he doesn't. And there's not going to be any in between. You won't be able to think of him as either as existing and not existing at the same time. My question is this. If you're a believer and you open the box and he did not exist, what would you have changed? Because I think about my life and I think, if God didn't exist, is there anything that I feel like I've missed out on by living a godly, moral Christian life? And the answer to that is really no. When Kurt Cloninger came, what many of you don't know that were here that night is that Kurt did not present the skit that he was supposed to present, that I'd asked him to present. And the reason is he could not bring himself emotionally to practice that skit because his 27-year-old son had been killed in a motorcycle accident just a few months prior. And he was deeply grieving his son. And what he said to me was this. He said, I'm just so tired. I'm just ready to go home. And he said, I hope this is all real. And I thought to myself and I told him, I said, I hope it's all real too. But you know what? If it's not, it's still been a good run. And so if you're a believer out there and we get to the end of life and we open the box and there is no God, we haven't risked anything. But what if you're not a believer? And you've told the whole world that there is no God and you've denied him at every turn, and you get to the end of life and he's real. What have you lost? You've lost everything. You see, all of our decisions in life are an assessment of risk. We must decide if believing is worth the risk. I say it is. Based on the evidence that we have, although I can't definitively prove God, I have enough evidence to say, you know what, believing that when this world is over and the box is open that there will be a God there, that risk is worth it. And if you don't believe, and you get to the end of this life and you open the box and he is there, was the risk worth it for you? N.T. Wright used to have students. He's a famous Christian writer. He had students that would come to the college, and some of them were atheists. And he would talk to them, and he would tell them, tell me about the God you don't believe in. I might not believe in him either. And once they told him, he would then say, no, I only believe in the God that is revealed in Jesus of Nazareth. I hope you'll tell me about the God you don't believe in. I probably don't believe in him either, but I do believe in the God that's revealed in Jesus. For in John 14:7 it said, if you'd known me, you would have known my Father also. And from now on, you know him and have seen him. Don't let religion get in the way of you knowing who God is and believing in his existence. Don't let people who are poor translators of God get in the way of you knowing God and believing that he exists, because it's a big risk you're taking with your soul.